The late afternoon sun dipped low over the rolling hills of Appalachia, casting long shadows through the dense oak and pine forest that bordered the small town of Pine Hollow, West Virginia. Golden rays filtered through the trees, painting flickering patterns across the patchy backyard where 5-year-old Luke Harper played with his toy trucks. His tousled brown hair fell over his forehead as he pushed a scratched-up dump truck through the dirt, humming a tune that mimicked the rumble of an engine. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the promise of rain, a warm breeze rustling the leaves overhead. Nearby, his mother, Hannah Harper, pinned damp clothes to a sagging clothesline, her movements quick and practiced. A single mom scraping by on her grocery store clerk wages, she found comfort in these quiet moments with her son. Luke's small hands suddenly froze mid-motion, the truck slipping from his grip to tumble into the dirt. His head tilted slightly, like a deer catching a distant sound, his wide blue eyes narrowing as he stared toward the tree line. "Mama," he whispered, his voice barely rising above the rustle of the wind. "Someone's crying." Hannah didn't look up, her focus on wrestling a stubborn bedsheet onto the line. "What's that, sweetheart?" she asked absently, brushing a strand of dark hair from her tired face. Luke stood slowly, his bare feet pressing into the earth, his small fists clenching. "It's out there," he said louder now, pointing toward the woods. "She's crying, Mama. She needs us." Hannah paused, a wooden clothespin dangling between her fingers, and turned to her son. The urgency in Luke's voice cut through her distraction, and she squinted toward the shadowed woods beyond their rickety fence. "I don't hear anything, honey," she said, her tone gentle but firm, expecting it to be another of his vivid imaginings. The rural sounds of Pine Hollow hummed around them. Distant cars on Route 19, the chirp of a cardinal, the faint clang of wind chimes from old Mrs. Delaney's porch. But Luke's face had paled, his freckles stark against his skin like scattered constellations. Tears welled in his blue eyes, magnifying their intensity. "She's hurt, Mama," he insisted, his lower lip trembling. "She's calling me. Why can't you hear her?" A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, and Hannah glanced up, unease prickling her spine. Dark clouds churned on the horizon, swallowing the last of the sun's warmth. The golden afternoon shifted to a grayish gloom, shadows stretching like fingers across the yard. She knelt beside Luke, resting a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his small frame. "Are you sure, Luke? There's no dogs out there that I know of," she said, but the unwavering conviction in his gaze made her breath hitch. Before she could stop him, Luke bolted toward the fence, his small fingers fumbling with the latch. "Luke!" Hannah shouted, dropping the clothespin as she sprinted after him, her heart pounding as he vanished into the trees, drawn by a cry she couldn't yet hear. The forest swallowed Luke whole as he darted past the fence, his small figure disappearing into the maze of twisted oaks and towering pines that edged Pine Hollow. Rain began to fall in hesitant drops, tapping against the leaves like a warning drum roll as thunder growled closer. Hannah's voice cracked with panic as she yelled, "Luke, stop!" But her bare feet pounded the damp earth in pursuit, her denim jacket snagging on jagged branches. The air turned heavy, thick with the scent of wet moss and something sharper, something metallic that twisted her stomach. She cursed under her breath, her heart hammering as the woods closed in, their shadows deepening with the storm's approach. Luke was fast for his age, driven by a purpose she couldn't yet grasp. Ahead, she caught glimpses of his red t-shirt flickering through the trees, a beacon in the growing gloom. "Luke Harper, you come back here," she shouted, her words swallowed by a sudden gust that bent the treetops low. Then she heard it, a faint, broken whimper cutting through the rustle of leaves, so weak it could have been the wind playing tricks. But Luke had stopped, his small body rigid in a clearing just beyond her reach. Lightning flashed, illuminating the horror before him. A German shepherd hung from a gnarled oak, a rusted chain biting into her neck, her swollen belly swaying as she struggled to stand on trembling paws. Her golden brown eyes, dim with pain, locked onto Luke's, pleading. Hannah stumbled into the clearing, her breath catching as the lightning's afterglow revealed the full extent of the dog's suffering. The German shepherd's matted fur clung to her emaciated frame, streaked with dirt and what looked like dried blood, her ribs jutting out beneath her swollen, pregnant belly. The chain had rubbed her neck raw, leaving oozing sores that glistened in the rain now falling harder. Luke dropped to his knees beside her, his small hands hovering, unsure where to touch without causing more pain. "Who did this, Mama?" he sobbed, his voice breaking as tears streaked his dirt-smudged face. "Why would they hurt her?" The dog whimpered again, a sound so frail it pierced Hannah's chest like a blade, and her own eyes burned with unshed tears. She knelt beside Luke, her hands trembling as she brushed the dog's matted fur, feeling the faint heat of life beneath the filth. "I don't know, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with horror and rage. Thunder roared, shaking the ground, and the dog flinched, her paws scrabbling weakly against the earth. Hannah's gaze darted to the chain, its rusty links taut against the tree. "We've got to get her down," she said, fumbling in her pocket for the garden shears she'd tucked there earlier while trimming rose bushes. Luke nodded, his small face set with determination beyond his years. "She's scared, Mama," he said, stroking her ear gently. "But we're here now." Rain lashed their faces as Hannah gripped the shears, resolve hardening in her gut. Rain hammered the forest floor, turning the earth beneath the ancient oak into a slick, muddy mess as Hannah gripped the garden shears with white-knuckled determination. Lightning split the sky, bathing the clearing in stark white light, and the German shepherd's golden-brown eyes flickered with a mix of fear and fading hope. The chain around her neck groaned under its own weight, rusted links biting deeper into her raw flesh with every weak struggle. Hannah's hands shook as she positioned the shears, her breath ragged in the storm's roar. "Hold on, girl," she murmured, her voice nearly lost to the wind. "We're getting you out." Beside her, Luke crouched close, his small fingers brushing the dog's matted fur, whispering, "You're safe now, I promise." Thunder crashed, so loud it vibrated through Hannah's chest, and the dog flinched, a pitiful whine escaping her throat. The shears slipped once on the wet metal, scraping uselessly, and Hannah cursed under her breath, sweat mixing with rain on her forehead. She adjusted her grip, squeezing the handles with all her strength, muscles straining as the chain resisted. Luke's small hand rested on the dog's head, steadying her as she trembled. "Mama, hurry," he urged, his voice tight with tears. With a final, desperate push, the shears snapped through the link, the chain clattering to the ground in a tangle of rust and ruin. The dog collapsed instantly, her legs buckling, but Luke lunged forward, catching her frail body against his chest, heedless of the mud and blood soaking into his clothes. Hannah dropped the shears, her hands aching as she knelt beside Luke, who cradled the German shepherd like she was made of glass. Rain poured in relentless sheets, plastering his brown hair to his forehead, but his focus never wavered. "I've got you," he whispered, his small arms trembling under her weight. The dog's swollen belly pressed against him, a cruel reminder of the life she carried despite her suffering. Her breathing was shallow, each gasp a battle, but her eyes, those deep golden pools, stayed fixed on Luke, as if drawing strength from his touch. Hannah's heart twisted. She'd never seen her son like this, so fierce, so tender all at once. "We can't stay here," Hannah said, her voice sharp with urgency as lightning flashed again, illuminating the dog's skeletal frame. She scanned the clearing, then pointed toward the old horse barn behind their house, its weathered silhouette barely visible through the storm. "Let's get her there. It's dry safe." Luke nodded, his jaw set, and together they lifted her. Hannah bore most of the weight, her arms straining as the dog's limp form sagged against her. But Luke refused to let go, supporting her head with a gentleness that belied his age. "Her name's Ivy," he declared suddenly, rain dripping from his chin. "She's strong, like the vines on the porch." Hannah managed a shaky smile despite the chaos. "Ivy it is," she agreed, staggering forward as thunder rolled, the barn their beacon in the tempest, promising shelter and maybe hope. The old horse barn loomed through the storm like a battered sentinel, its warped wooden walls creaking as Hannah and Luke stumbled inside, Ivy limp in their arms. Rain pounded the tin roof, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the world beyond Pine Hollow, while flashes of lightning slipped through the cracks, casting wild shadows across the musty space. Hannah kicked the door shut behind them, her soaked clothes clinging to her skin as she lowered Ivy onto a pile of brittle hay. The air smelled of damp wood and decay, but it was dry, safer than the forest's wrath. Luke knelt beside Ivy, his small hands trembling as he stroked her matted fur, whispering, "You're okay now, Ivy. We're home." Hannah grabbed a flickering lantern from a rusty hook, its weak glow revealing the dog's dire state. Ivy's swollen belly heaved with each shallow breath, her golden brown eyes half-closed in exhaustion. The sores on her neck oozed beneath the filth, and her body shivered despite the barn's relative warmth. "She's so cold, Mama," Luke said, his voice cracking as he tucked his jacket around her. Then, a sharp whimper escaped Ivy's throat, her hind legs twitching restlessly. Hannah's stomach dropped. She'd seen this before, years ago with a cousin's hound. "Luke," she said, kneeling beside him, her voice tight with realization. "She's having her babies. Right now." Outside, the storm howled louder, as if the night itself knew what was coming, its fury mirroring the fragile life trembling before them. Hannah's hands hovered over Ivy, her mind racing as the dog's whimpers grew sharper, more urgent. She had no training for this, only faint memories of helping her cousin with a litter years ago, but there was no time to hesitate. "Luke, get those blankets from the shelf," she ordered, pointing to a dusty stack in the corner. He scrambled to obey, dragging the faded quilts back and helping her fashion a makeshift nest around Ivy. The dog's belly rippled visibly, a contraction seizing her frail body, and she let out a low, pained howl that echoed through the barn. Luke flinched but stayed close, his small hand resting on her head. "You can do it, Ivy," he whispered, his voice steady despite the tears streaking his face. "Your babies are coming." The first puppy slid into the world with a shuddering push, a tiny, dark bundle encased in a slick membrane. Hannah tore it away with trembling fingers, rubbing the pup's chest until it squeaked. A fragile cry piercing the storm's din. Luke's eyes widened with wonder as she placed it near Ivy's muzzle, the mother licking it weakly. 2 more followed, each birth a battle Ivy barely seemed strong enough to fight. But the 4th came still, lifeless in Hannah's hands. Luke took it without a word, his small fingers massaging its chest, tears falling faster now. "Please," he begged. "Wake up." A faint twitch, then a gasp. Ivy's golden eyes flickered with something like gratitude as the barn's walls rattled, the night far from over. The lantern's dim glow flickered across the horse barn's weathered walls, casting trembling shadows as Hannah and Luke sat beside Ivy and her newborn pups. The storm had softened to a steady drizzle, its patter on the tin roof a deceptive lullaby masking the tension within. Ivy lay curled around her 5 tiny pups, her breathing labored but steady, her golden brown eyes half open as she licked each one with fading strength. Luke's small hand rested on her flank, his face streaked with dried tears and hay dust, a quiet pride glowing in his blue eyes. "They're all safe now, Mama," he whispered, watching the pups squirm against their mother's warmth. Hannah nodded, exhaustion tugging at her bones, but a fragile peace settled over her, until it didn't. A faint creak snapped her head toward the barn door, her pulse spiking. Ivy's ears pricked forward, a low growl rumbling in her chest despite her weakened state. Hannah held her breath, straining to hear over the rain's murmur. There it was again, a deliberate shuffle, boots crunching on wet gravel just outside. "Luke, stay with Ivy," she hissed, rising silently and grabbing a rusty pitchfork propped against the wall. Her hands trembled as she crept toward the door, its wooden frame rattling faintly in the wind. Ivy's growl deepened, her body tensing as if ready to spring despite the odds. Then, the door's latch clicked, inching open with agonizing slowness, and a sliver of moonlight revealed a gloved hand gripping the edge, a stranger stepping into their sanctuary. Hannah's grip tightened on the pitchfork, her knuckles whitening as the barn door swung wider, the stranger's silhouette filling the frame. Rain glistened on a dark coat, and the faint gleam of a metal object, maybe a knife, flashed in the lantern's weak light. Ivy's growl turned into a fierce bark, sharp and desperate, her frail body lurching forward to shield her pups. The sound jolted the intruder, who froze mid-step, their face still hidden in shadow. "Quiet, mutt," a gruff voice rasped, low and menacing. But Ivy's defiance only grew, her teeth bared despite the pain racking her frame. Luke clutched her closer, his small voice trembling. "Leave her alone!" Hannah lunged forward, pitchfork raised, her maternal fury overriding fear. "Get out!" she shouted, her voice cracking as she thrust the tines toward the figure. The stranger stumbled back, startled, and something slipped from their hand, a crumpled piece of paper fluttering to the muddy floor. With a muttered curse, they retreated, boots pounding gravel as they vanished into the night. Hannah slammed the door shut, shoving a heavy crate against it, her chest heaving. She snatched the paper, unfolding it with shaking hands. Scrawled in jagged ink were the words, "Return what's mine." Luke's wide eyes met hers, confusion and fear mingling. "Mama, what does it mean?" he asked, his voice small. Hannah's stomach twisted. She didn't know, but the threat hung heavy, a promise of more danger lurking beyond the barn's fragile walls. Dawn broke over Pine Hollow in a wash of pale gray, the storm's remnants dripping from the trees as Hannah stood in the barn doorway, clutching the crumpled note. The words "Return what's mine" burned into her mind, a riddle wrapped in a threat that kept sleep at bay. Inside, Luke dozed beside Ivy and her pups, his small body curled protectively around them on the hay-strewn floor. Ivy's breathing had steadied, but her golden-brown eyes followed Hannah with a wary alertness, as if she too sensed the danger lingering beyond the barn. The air was damp and cold, heavy with the scent of wet earth and the faint tang of blood from Ivy's wounds. Hannah knew they couldn't stay here, not with that stranger out there watching. She slipped the note into her pocket and hurried to the house, her boots sinking into the muddy yard. They needed help, someone who could treat Ivy and maybe shed light on this nightmare. Doc Sullivan, the town's gruff but kind-hearted veterinarian, was her only hope. As she grabbed her truck keys, a shadow moved near the fence. Earl Grayson, their reclusive neighbor, leaning on a cane with his weathered face half hidden under a battered hat. He'd lived on the edge of the woods for years, a quiet man with rumors swirling around him. A hunter, a hermit, maybe worse. "Heard you got a new dog," he called, his voice raspy, eyes glinting with something Hannah couldn't place. "Hope it ain't more trouble than it's worth." Hannah froze, her hand tightening on the keys as Earl's words hung in the air like a veiled warning. His gaze darted toward the barn, then back to her, his thin lips curling into a faint, unreadable smirk. "Folks lose things in these woods all the time," he added, tapping his cane against the soggy ground before turning away, hobbling back toward his ramshackle cabin. A chill raced down her spine. Did he know something about Ivy? The note? She shook off the thought, her instincts screaming to get moving. Back in the barn, she gently roused Luke. "We're taking Ivy to Doc Sullivan," she said, her voice low but firm. "She needs a doctor, and we need answers." Luke rubbed sleepy eyes but nodded, helping her wrap the pups in a blanket while she fashioned a sling from an old tarp to carry Ivy. The dog whimpered as they lifted her, her body trembling, but she didn't resist, trusting them despite her pain. Hannah's old pickup rumbled to life, the engine's growl cutting through the morning quiet as they eased out of the yard, Ivy cradled in Luke's lap. Doc's clinic was 10 miles down Route 19, a winding stretch flanked by dense forest. As they drove, Hannah's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, half expecting Earl's hunched figure, or worse, to appear. Luke stroked Ivy's ear, whispering, "You're gonna be okay." But the note in Hannah's pocket felt like a lead weight, its mystery pulling them deeper into a storm far darker than the one they'd left behind. The old pickup rattled along Route 19, its tires humming against the wet asphalt as Hannah gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles pale against the cracked leather. Clouds hung low over the Appalachia hills, their dark edges promising more rain as the forest blurred past in shades of gray and green. In the passenger seat, Luke held Ivy close, the German shepherd's head resting on his lap, her pups nestled in a blanket beside him. Her breathing was ragged, each exhale a faint whine, but her golden-brown eyes stayed fixed on Luke, trusting despite her pain. "Hang on, Ivy," he murmured, stroking her ear. "Doc's gonna fix you." Hannah forced a tight smile, but her gut churned. The note in her pocket felt like a ticking bomb. The road twisted through the trees, narrow and shadowed, the kind of stretch where deer darted out unexpectedly. Hannah's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, scanning for any sign of pursuit. Earl's cryptic words gnawed at her, and the stranger's gloved hand haunted her thoughts. Then, a flash of movement. Headlights flared behind them, too close, too fast. Her heart lurched as a black SUV roared into view, its engine growling like a predator. "Luke, get down!" she barked, stomping the gas. The truck lurched forward, protesting with a groan. But the SUV gained ground, its tinted windows hiding the driver's face. A sharp glint caught her eye, metal, maybe a gun, jutting from the passenger side, aimed their way. Hannah swerved as a gunshot cracked through the air, the bullet pinging off the truck's tailgate with a metallic screech. Luke yelped, ducking low with Ivy, his arms shielding her and the pups as the blanket slid to the floor. "Mama!" he cried, his voice muffled against Ivy's fur. Hannah's pulse thundered in her ears, her hands slick with sweat as she wrestled the wheel, the pickup fishtailing on the rain-slicked curve. "Hold on!" she shouted, flooring the accelerator. The engine sputtered but obeyed, rocketing them down the winding road as trees blurred into a dark tunnel around them. The SUV stayed relentless, its headlights glaring like eyes in the mirror, closing the gap with every second. A sign flashed by Pine Hollow Veterinary, 2 miles. Hope flickered in Hannah's chest, but the SUV surged closer, its bumper kissing the truck's rear. Another shot rang out, shattering the back window in a spray of glass that rained over Ivy and Luke. The dog whimpered, curling tighter around her pups, and Luke's small hand gripped Hannah's arm. "They're gonna kill her," he sobbed. Hannah gritted her teeth, yanking the wheel hard to dodge a third shot. The truck skidded onto a gravel turnout, tires spinning wildly before catching traction. Ahead, the clinic's faded sign loomed through the haze. "We're almost there," she rasped, glancing at the phone rattling on the dash. Doc's voice crackled through a missed call. "Hannah, get out now, they're coming for you." Too late, they already had. The pickup screeched to a halt in the gravel lot of Pine Hollow Veterinary Clinic, its engine coughing as Hannah killed the ignition. Dusk had settled over the small town, the clinic's single-story building a dark silhouette against the bruised sky, its windows unlit and eerily still. Hannah's hands shook as she yanked the door open, glass shards crunching under her boots from the shattered rear window. "Luke, help me with Ivy," she said, her voice raw with adrenaline. He scrambled out, cradling the German shepherd's head while Hannah lifted her trembling body, the pups bundled in the blanket against her chest. Ivy's golden-brown eyes flickered with pain, but she nuzzled Luke's hand, a faint wag of her tail showing trust amid the chaos. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and wet fur, the reception area dim save for a flickering fluorescent bulb. Doc Sullivan emerged from the back, his wiry frame tense, glasses slipping down his nose. "Thank God you made it," he said, locking the door behind them. His gray eyes darkened as he examined Ivy, fingers tracing the sores on her neck. "She's in bad shape, malnourished, infected. But this—" He paused, lifting her matted fur to reveal a faint scar. A circled RB burned into her shoulder. Ronald Baxter's mark. "She's from his fighting ring." Hannah's stomach dropped, the note's threat echoing in her mind. Before she could speak, headlights swept across the windows. Tires crunched outside. Doc's face hardened. "They're here." Sheriff Nora Carter burst through the clinic's back door, her silver-streaked hair disheveled, badge glinting under her open jacket. "Hannah, Luke, we've got no time," she snapped, Her voice clipped with authority. Baxter's men tracked you. I've got deputies en route, but we need a plan. She knelt beside Ivy, her stern face softening briefly at the sight of the pups nestled against their mother. This dog's evidence, and those bastards know it. Doc nodded, already pulling antibiotics from a cabinet. She's a fighter, refused to kill for them, so they left her to die. Pups are worth thousands on the black market. Hannah clutched Luke's shoulder, his small frame trembling as he whispered, "They can't take her, Mama." Nora stood, her radio crackling with updates. "We'll use Ivy as bait, set a trap here. But you two can't stay. Baxter's crew doesn't mess around." Hannah's jaw tightened. "I'm not leaving her." Nora's eyes narrowed, but she relented. "Fine. Luke goes to my brother's cabin up in the hills, safe, off-grid. Deputy Jake's outside. He'll drive him." Luke's face crumpled, tears spilling as he hugged Ivy's neck. "I'll be back, I promise," he choked out, kissing her muzzle. Hannah's heart tore as Jake, a lanky young deputy with uneasy eyes, ushered Luke to a patrol car. She turned to Nora, resolve stealing her voice. "Tell me the plan." Outside, engines rumbled closer, a storm of a different kind closing in, ready to test their fragile stand. Night cloaked the cabin in a shroud of silence. Its pine walls nestled deep in the Appalachia hills, far from Pine Hollow's lights. Hannah paced the creaky floorboards, her boots echoing in the small living room as Luke sat on a faded couch, clutching a mug of cocoa Deputy Jake had made before stepping outside to guard the porch. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and tension, the only sound the wind whistling through the trees. Ivy and her pups were miles away, under Nora's watch at the clinic, but Hannah's chest ached with their absence. "Mama, when can we see Ivy?" Luke asked, his blue eyes shadowed with worry. She forced a smile. "Soon, baby. She's safe with document." A sharp crack split the quiet with snapping outside. Hannah froze, her hand flying to the kitchen counter where a carving knife lay. Jake's silhouette should have been visible through the window, but the porch light was out, the darkness absolute. "Luke, hide under the couch," she whispered, her voice trembling as she gripped the knife. He slid down without a word, his small body vanishing into the shadows. Footsteps crunched on gravel, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. Hannah's pulse roared in her ears as the doorknob rattled, then turned. The door creaked open, revealing a tall figure in a dark hood, a syringe glinting in their hand. Before she could react, a voice hissed from the gloom. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to save you." Hannah raised the knife, her stance rigid as the figure stepped into the cabin's dim glow, hands raised to show the syringe wasn't aimed at her. "Name's Ryan Tate," he said, voice low and urgent, pulling back his hood to reveal a rugged face, eyes sharp with purpose. "Undercover task force. Your deputy's out cold, drugged, not dead. Baxter's men are minutes away." Hannah's grip faltered, confusion warring with fear. "How do I know you're not one of them?" she demanded. Ryan flashed a badge, its metal catching the faint light. 8 months deep in Baxter's crew. "There's a leak, Jake sold you out. They're not after Ivy now. They're after you and the kid. Witnesses." Luke peeked from under the couch, his small voice cutting through the tension. "Mama!" Hannah waved him back, her mind racing. Ryan's words hit like a punch. "Luke, a target." "Why not the clinic?" she pressed. "Diversion," Ryan said grimly. "Baxter wants the evidence gone. You the boy, then the dog." Headlights flickered through the trees, engines rumbling closer. "We've got to move," Ryan urged, tossing her a set of keys. "My SUV's down the trail. Get in, stay low." Hannah grabbed Luke's hand, pulling him up as he clung to her. "Ivy needs us," he insisted, eyes fierce. Ryan nodded. "We're going back for her. This ends tonight." They bolted into the dark, the cabin's safety shattering behind them as tires screeched onto the gravel. Baxter's hunters closing in. Ryan's SUV tore through the night, its headlights slicing the dark as they sped back toward Pine Hollow Veterinary Clinic. Hannah clung to the passenger seat, her nails digging into the worn fabric, while Luke huddled in the back, his small hands gripping the edge of the blanket they'd grabbed from the cabin. "They won't get Ivy," he said, his voice fierce despite the tremor in it. A 5-year-old's resolve hardened by love. Ryan's jaw was set, eyes fixed on the road. "Baxter's there himself, thinks he's won. He doesn't know I've turned." The radio crackled with static, Nora's voice lost in the interference. Proof the trap had unraveled. The clinic loomed ahead, its windows dark, the parking lot eerily still. Ryan killed the engine a block away, motioning them out. "Stay low," he whispered, drawing his gun as they crept through the shadows. The air was thick with damp pine and the faint tang of gasoline. Someone had been here. Inside, chaos reigned. Overturned chairs, papers strewn across the floor, a single emergency light buzzing overhead. Voices echoed from the back. Doc Sullivan's, sharp with defiance, and another cold and commanding. Hannah's heart sank as they peered into the treatment room. Ronald Baxter stood there, silver hair gleaming, a pistol pressed to Ivy's head. The German shepherd struggled against a rope leash, blood seeping from a fresh wound on her flank. "No!" Luke shouted, breaking free from Hannah's grasp, charging forward as Baxter's finger tightened on the trigger. Time slowed as Luke's cry shattered the room, his small body a blur racing toward Ivy. Hannah lunged after him, her scream caught in her throat, but Baxter's gun swung toward the boy, his cold eyes narrowing. "Stupid kid," he snarled, the pistol's barrel glinting in the dim light. Before the shot could ring out, Ivy surged forward with a primal snarl, her wounded body breaking free of the rope in a desperate lunge. She crashed into Baxter, teeth snapping at his arm, and the gun fired wild, the bullet burying into the wall as they hit the floor. Blood streaked Ivy's fur, her growl fading into a pained yelp, but she'd bought them seconds. Ryan burst in, tackling Baxter as the man scrambled for his weapon, pinning him with a swift cuff to the wrists. Doc Sullivan, bloodied but alive, wrestled free from a corner, shouting, "Get her to the table!" Hannah scooped Ivy up, her hands slick with the dog's blood, while Luke clung to her side, sobbing, "Don't die, Ivy!" Across the room, Nora staggered in, zip ties dangling from her wrists, Deputy Jake in custody behind her. "Traitor!" she spat, kicking Jake's legs out as deputies swarmed the clinic. Ivy's golden brown eyes fluttered, locking onto Luke's tear-streaked face as Hannah laid her on the surgical table. Doc grabbed his kit, hands steady despite the chaos. "She's still fighting," he said, voice grim. "But it's bad." The night wasn't over. Ivy's life hung by a thread. The surgical room of Pine Hollow Veterinary Clinic buzzed with a desperate energy, its sterile white light casting harsh shadows over Ivy's blood-streaked fur. Doc Sullivan worked with grim precision, his hands steady as he stitched the bullet wound in her flank, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool air. Ivy lay limp on the table, her golden brown eyes dulled by pain, and 4 dripping fluids into her frail body. Hannah stood beside her, one hand gripping Luke's shoulder, the other hovering near Ivy's head, stroking her ear with trembling fingers. "Stay with us, girl," she whispered, her voice cracking. Luke pressed closer, his small face pale, tears carving tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "You're the bravest, Ivy," he said, his words a fragile lifeline. Outside, deputies hauled Baxter and Jake away, their curses fading under Nora's sharp commands. But inside, time stretched thin. The pups whimpered from an incubator in the corner, their tiny cries a haunting echo of their mother's struggle. Doc's assistant, a young deputy named Clara with vet tech training, adjusted the monitors, her face tight with focus. "Her pulse is dropping," she warned, voice low. Doc cursed under his breath, threading another suture. "She's lost too much blood. Damn miracle she's lasted this long." Hannah's chest tightened, the weight of Ivy's sacrifice crashing over her. She'd saved Luke, taken a bullet meant for him, and now they could only watch, helpless, as her life flickered like a candle in a gale. Doc's hands moved faster, a blur of motion as he fought to close Ivy's wounds, the beep of the heart monitor slowing ominously. Hannah squeezed Luke's shoulder, feeling his small body tremble as he leaned over Ivy, whispering, "Don't leave us, please." The dog's chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath a labored rasp, but her eyes flickered open, locking onto Luke's with a faint spark of recognition. Her tongue darted out, weakly licking his hand, and a sob broke from his throat. "She's still here, Mama," he cried, hope flaring in his voice. Hannah nodded, tears spilling down her face as she clung to that fragile sign of life. Clara adjusted the fore, her voice steady despite the strain. Blood pressures stabilizing barely. Doc stepped back, wiping his brow with a bloodied sleeve, his glasses fogged with exertion. "That's all I can do," he said, exhaustion lacing his words. "She's a fighter, but it's up to her now." He gestured to the pups, safe and warm in their incubator. "They need her, and so do you." Nora slipped into the room, her face etched with fatigue but resolute. Baxter's singing like a canary, his whole operations crumbling. "This girl's a hero." She nodded at Ivy, a rare softness in her eyes. Hannah knelt beside Luke, wrapping him in her arms as they watched Ivy's chest rise, fall, rise again. The fight wasn't over, but in that sterile glow, a quiet strength held them together, binding them to the dog who'd changed everything. Autumn painted Pine Hollow in hues of amber and crimson, the Appalachia hills glowing under a crisp October sun as Hannah stepped onto the porch of their modest home. Weeks had passed since that brutal night at the clinic, and the scars, of both land and soul, were beginning to soften. Ivy trotted out beside her, her golden-brown fur gleaming, the limp in her gait barely noticeable now. She paused, sniffing the air, then settled at Hannah's feet with a contented sigh. In the yard, Luke laughed as he tossed a frayed tennis ball to Faith, the golden-eyed pup they'd kept from Ivy's litter, her playful bounds kicking up fallen leaves. The other 4 pups had found homes with families vetted by Doc Sullivan, each a thread in the tapestry of healing woven from that stormy beginning. Hannah leaned against the railing, her chest swelling with a quiet pride. Ivy's recovery had been a miracle. Doc called it sheer will, fueled by the bond she'd forged with Luke. The community had rallied, too. An anonymous donor paid her vet bills, the feed store sent free supplies, and a local carpenter built a sturdy doghouse, though Ivy preferred the couch. Nora's voice echoed from a recent visit. "Baxter's locked up for life, his empire's dust." But today wasn't about vengeance. It was about peace. Luke ran up, breathless, Faith at his heels. "Mama, look how strong Ivy is now," he beamed, hugging the dog's neck. Ivy licked his face, her tail thumping. A promise kept. A rustle in the mailbox caught Hannah's eye, and she crossed the yard, pulling out a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a letter, scrawled in a hurried hand. "Hannah, Luke, Baxter's dogs are free. 17 saved, rehomed because of Ivy. You gave us the break we needed. Stay safe. Ryan." Her breath hitched. Ryan Tate, the undercover shadow who'd pulled them from the abyss. She glanced at Ivy, realization dawning. This battered dog hadn't just saved her son. She'd dismantled a legacy of cruelty. Luke tugged her sleeve, peering up. "What's it say, Mama?" She knelt, showing him. "It says Ivy's a hero, baby. She helped so many." His eyes widened, then softened as he hugged Ivy tighter. "I knew she was special." The sun dipped low, casting a golden veil over the hills as Hannah sat on the porch steps, Luke and Ivy beside her. Faith sprawled across their feet. "We're family forever," Luke declared, his voice steady with a child's certainty. Hannah nodded, her throat tight. Ivy had come to them broken, a cry in the dark, and they'd saved each other. Not just from Baxter's bullet, but from a life half-lived. She rested a hand on Ivy's warm flank, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath. "You're safe now," she whispered, the words a vow etched into their shared scars. In that quiet glow, with laughter and love binding them, they'd built a home, not just of wood and nails, but of courage and grace, a legacy to outlast any storm.